In 1897, a young woman named Zona Heaster was found dead inside her home in Greenbrier County. Her death initially appeared natural, but within weeks her mother would make a claim that seemed impossible. Zona had returned from the grave. Greenbrier County was a rural community where neighbors knew one another and news traveled. In this isolated landscape, the death was already disturbing. But the circumstances surrounding Zona's death would soon attract the attention all. Zona had married Erasmus Shue, known as Edward, in November 1896. The marriage was still new when Zona became ill in early January. A local physician, Dr. Knapp, examined her but found no clear organic cause for her illness. Edward worked as a blacksmith. On the morning of January 22, 1897, he went to his shop as usual. Nothing about that morning seemed extraordinary, but before the day was over, Edward would return home to find his young wife dead. On January 22, 1897, he went to work as usual. Nothing seemed unusual that morning, but before the day was over, Edward would return home to discover his young wife, Zona, dead inside their house. Anderson went to the Shue home and knocked. When nobody answered, he entered. Inside, he discovered Zona lying motionless on the floor. He ran back to tell his mother, then continued to Edward's blacksmith shop with the terrible news. Edward rushed home. Dr. Knapp examined Zona and initially believed she had died naturally. Her body was prepared for burial, but the strange circumstances surrounding her death left those who knew her deeply troubled. While preparing Zona's body, Dr. Knapp noticed discoloration around her neck and cheek. He wanted to investigate further, but Edward objected. Zona was buried, and her apparent natural cause of death remained unchanged for the moment. Zona was buried in Meadows Cemetery. Her family mourned while Edward moved on. Weeks later, doubts about her death grew. The question became more disturbing. Had Zona died naturally, or had she been murdered? Zona's mother, Mary Jane Heaster, was devastated. According to her later testimony, she prayed that her daughter might return and tell her what had happened. What followed became the most extraordinary part of the entire case. Mary Jane later claimed Zona appeared to her while she was fully awake. She said Zona spoke about her death and insisted it was not a dream. According to Mary Jane, these visitations happened repeatedly. According to Mary Jane's courtroom testimony, Zona appeared to her 4 times over 4 nights. At first, she said, Zona spoke only indirectly about what had happened, but during the later appearances, the message became much more specific. Mary Jane claimed Zona described an argument with Edward over supper. She said Edward became angry because there was no meat. According to her testimony, the dispute escalated until the argument turned violent. Mary Jane claimed Zona said Edward grabbed her and violently twisted her neck, dislocating it. It was only a grieving mother's testimony, but investigators would soon compare her story with physical evidence. Mary Jane also said that Zona described places and details around the Shue home that she believed she could not have known. She became convinced that her daughter's spirit was trying to direct attention toward the truth of her death. At first, many dismissed Mary Jane's claims as grief, but her persistence convinced relatives that Zona's death deserved investigation. Eventually, her story reached people with the authority to reopen the case. Mary Jane took her claims to prosecutor John A. Preston, who initially doubted them. After hearing her story, he ordered an investigation. The question was no longer supernatural. It was whether Zona's body could reveal evidence of murder. Zona's body was exhumed for a post-mortem examination. Doctors Knapp, Rupert, and McClung examined her remains and found evidence that changed the case. The natural death explanation could no longer account for the condition of her neck. The examination found Zona's neck dislocated, between the first and second vertebrae, with torn ligaments and a crushed windpipe. Her other organs appeared healthy, making natural death increasingly unlikely. The evidence made the original diagnosis impossible to maintain. Zona had not simply died from an unexplained illness. Her neck had suffered severe injuries. The investigation now had a medical basis for treating her death as homicide. Suspicion turned toward Edward. Investigators examined his behavior, statements, and actions after Zona's death. But the case had a major weakness. No eyewitness had actually seen Zona being killed. The prosecution's case was circumstantial. No one witnessed the killing, but prosecutors argued that Edward's behavior, inconsistencies, and the condition of Zona's body together pointed toward murder. Edward was arrested and charged with murdering Zona. The case moved to court, where an extraordinary witness awaited, Mary Jane, who claimed Zona had revealed the details of her murder after death. The trial began in Greenbrier Circuit Court in June 1897. Prosecutors presented medical evidence and circumstances surrounding Zona's death. Then Mary Jane Heaster testified, describing what she claimed her daughter's spirit had revealed. Mary Jane insisted the visitations were real, not dreams. She described Zona's alleged final moments and neck injury. Defense attorneys questioned whether grief caused the visions, but Mary Jane stood by her story. Mary Jane testified that a sheet beneath Zona's head had turned reddish after washing. The strange detail became another memorable piece of evidence in an already extraordinary murder trial. Edward denied the accusations, calling them spiteful and insisting he loved Zona. But contemporary reports said his testimony and courtroom manner made an unfavorable impression on observers. After about an hour of deliberation, the jury found Edward guilty of first-degree murder. They recommended mercy, so he was sentenced to life in prison instead of execution. Edward was sent to West Virginia State Penitentiary, where he died during an epidemic in 1900. Zona remained buried in Greenbrier County, while her story grew into one of West Virginia's most famous supernatural mysteries. The murder, autopsy, and conviction were real. But whether Zona's spirit appeared to her mother remains impossible to prove. Mary Jane never changed her story, leaving one haunting question. Did the dead really speak?